Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
Morning.
We are in Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph. We're going to continue in the sugya of Shehiyah and Chazara. As we saw in the Mishnah said that lo yitain, that if you have a oven that has a heat source that is still on, which is that you have wood or grape sediment from or olive sediment from a press, and now the fuel is still raging, you have not covered it or you have not raked it out. Lo yitain, do not put the food on. And the machlokas we saw is, does lo yitain mean that you cannot even be masheh, lishos tanan, you can't even leave food there before Shabbos to remain on for Shabbos, or lo yitain means lahachzir tanan, hachzara, returning the food, that you're not allowed to put the food back once you've taken it off. And the Gemara goes to lengths to try and fit the Mishnah with the opinion of Hanania, that you're allowed to leave food on an uncovered heat source from before Shabbos into Shabbos, even if it's not completely cooked and diminishing in a way that it's bad for it. You're allowed to leave the food on. Tues says the reason is because that's the halacha. So now we're going to see at the bottom of Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph what happens if you did cover the heat source. You threw some coal, some ash on top of the coals, and now it has lit itself up again. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Shai. Katma v'huvara. He threw ash on top of the coals, as Rashi says, in order to diminish the temperature, as other Rishonim say, in order to show that he doesn't want to stoke the flames and make it hotter, as a reminder for himself. But now the flames reignited themselves, and now they are as strong as they were before, and essentially his cover is no longer there. So as long as the food is completely cooked, you can continue keeping it there, whether it's hot water or foods. So you turn the page to Lamed Zayin Amud Beis. Shema mina. So the Gemara says from that we can learn mitztamik v'yafalei, that even if it is still good for the food to continue cooking, however, it's fully cooked and diminishing in size. It's shriveling more. However, but it's good for it. You like it well done. It's good for this food to continue cooking. Nevertheless, you're allowed You're allowed to keep it there. And Rashi says that how do we know this? Because if we're talking about that it's mitztamek varala, that it is bad for the food, then you can keep it there in any case. You don't have to say that he covered it and it became uncovered, as it were, because the flames reignited themselves. Of course, then it would be okay, because there's no concern of shemi achata b'gechola, maybe you're going to fan the flames if it's already completely cooked and not good for the food anymore. It's burning. It's getting it's detrimental to the food. You're not going to fan the flames. So rather, it must be that it's talking about that it's mitztamik v'yafalo, that even though that it's fully cooked, it is good for the food. There's a benefit, and nevertheless, you're allowed to keep it there.
What's the din if let's say he says, it's a little bit too hot, and he takes the pot and he just moves it kind of like a little, halfway over. Well, what people do, you move it directly off the flame, but it's still like on the flame, but it's like not on top of the flame. It's like a little bit, it's half on, half off. What's the din there? Is that called masha? Is that like a different?
Yeah, as long as it's on top of the stove, that's called shehiyah. You've left it on the fire. Because what may happen is that it's not as hot as you want it, it's not as well done as you want it, and you're going to stoke the flames. You have to do something either to cover the heat source, or to remove the heat source. Now there is a discussion in whether or not you have to take out all the heat, all the coals, all the wood, or you could take out some as a reminder. But if you leave the pot on top, it's just like not directly on top, you moved it off to the side, that's not going to be enough. We did see yesterday that if you take it off the stove completely and put it on the side of the stove, where the side is also hot because you have a wood in the oven, so the side is going to be hot. That was a separate discussion where you're being seimich, you're masmich on the side. But if it's on top of the stove, it's on top of the stove. Yeah, there is a halachic discussion in what we have a blech. You have a piece of metal on top of your stove as a cover to your heat source. Now you have directly above where the flame is, and then you have the rest of the stove where there isn't a flame directly beneath. So there's a machlekes haposkim. Does it all count as on the stove, or do different corners, different edges, which are not directly above the heat and not as hot, also count as on the stove? So that'll have a leniency and a stringency in either way, and there's a machlokes about that. But as far as that's when you already have a cover to your stove, but it's not directly above. Here we're talking about you have an uncovered, the pot is directly on the stove. You have a heat source, your wood, that you covered with ash in order to diminish the heat, as Rashi said in the Mishnah, or to make it or to make it a hecker, to remind yourself not to stoke the flames. But now it reignited itself, and the Gemara says that you can continue to leave the food on the flame, and the chiddush is that even though it's mitzdamek v'yafelo, even though that it is still good for the food, nevertheless, to continue cooking, nevertheless, you're allowed to keep it there. And Tues has a few kashas on Rashi and a different explanation in this. But either way, the Gemara is saying that we can deduce from here that mitzdamek v'yafelo, that if the food is fully cooked, but yet it is still beneficial for the food to continue cooking, mutter, you're allowed to keep it there. Shani hache de katma. So Gemara says, well, perhaps over here, the reason is because he already did an action to cover it. So he showed that he doesn't want it to continue cooking too much because he diminished the flame already. Well, if he doesn't want it anymore, and it's specifically over here because he already covered it, so what's the chiddush? That seems pretty obvious that for him, it's like mitzdamek v'ralo. For him, it's diminishing, and it's not good for it because he's already shown that he doesn't want it to continue cooking. Well, what we need is the fact that to tell us that even though that it is reignited, and it's as if it never really stopped, he never really covered it. I mean, I thought it goes back to its original status, and the cover that he made is gone, and so he's not allowed to keep it on there. Kamash Malan to tell us that no, that since he already did an action to indicate he doesn't want it to continue cooking, he diminished the heat. He showed that he's not going to fan the flames by covering it, and therefore it's not. He can continue keeping there, and it's not a problem of shahid. Kamash Malan. Amar Rabba Babachana Rabbi Yochanan. Katma v'huvara mashanala chamin shehuchmakol tzarka v'tav shel bishakol tzarka. Rabbi Yochanan says that if you covered it and then it reignited, it started up again, then you're allowed to keep food on there that was fully cooked or hot water that's on there. And even if it is these coals that last long and have a strong heat. Again, we see that even though that it's good for the food to continue cooking, as long as it's fully cooked, you're allowed to keep it on the flames over Shabbos, into Shabbos. So Gemara says, Shani hacha the katma. Here you did some action to try and diminish the flame, so you indicated you don't want it to continue cooking, is the way Rashi understands. And you're no longer in a chashash that it's going to you're no longer in a chashash that you're going to stoke the flames again, and that's why you're allowed to keep it that way. Well, then what do I have to tell that to you? When you already indicated that to you, it's mitzvah varala is the way Rashi learned. You've already indicated that to you this is bad if it continues cooking. Well, the fact that it reignited, it's as if your cover is no longer there. Nevertheless, you're allowed to keep it there. It's exactly what we learned before. Well, he needed to tell you that even if it has these very strong, long-lasting colds. So we have the statement that if you did an action, at least, you're allowed to keep it there if it's a stomach v'yafel, even though that it's still good for it to continue cooking. So Rav Shesha said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that even if it has a proper heat source, you're allowed to keep the food there from before Shabbos to continue cooking into Shabbos. Even if it's not fully cooked water, and even if it's not fully cooked foods, you're allowed to keep it there. However, akar, once you removed it, but once you removed it, you cannot put it back on until you take out the heat source, meaning you rake out some or all of the coals, or until you cover it with ash. And as we mentioned yesterday, the yigrov, until he rakes out the coals, we'll talk about it that it's on Shabbos, because if you can't put it back on Shabbos. So what Tues had a one mahalach, but we said what the simple reading is that what it means is unless he's already done so, that's what he would need to do in preparation in order to be allowed to put it back on Shabbos. And therefore, we can deduce that Rabbi Yochanan is of the opinion that our Mishnah that says that you cannot put foods on the stove. What it means is you cannot put food back onto the stove. Hachazara, lahachzir tanan, to put the food back. But ava lahashos and lishos, but to keep something on the stove from before Shabbos to continue cooking into Shabbos, mashin, you're allowed to do so even if it's not fully cooked. Even though that is not a covered heat source, so you've not raked out the coals. And we have a brisa that supports both of these ideas, that you're allowed to keep it on if it's not fully cooked and the heat source is not covered. And also that you're not allowed to return it if the heat source is uncovered. Because we learned, Lishos Taninu, that you're allowed to keep it on from before Shabbos and to continue cooking into Shabbos, even if it's not fully cooked and the heat source is uncovered. Because it says, you're not allowed to put bread into an oven right before Shabbos comes in. And not a piece of meat directly on the coals. Unless it already cooked partially, so that the outer layer crusted. And we saw whether it means the side near the oven or the side near the flame. Either way, it has to partially have cooked. But if partially it is cooked already, even though there's much more to do, it still needs to cook more. But it's already kama'achal ben rusay. We saw earlier, according to Hanania, it's already cooked enough that ben rusay would eat it, whether that's a third or a half. So over here we say karmu panel for a bread, that it's already cooked enough that the outer layer is crusted. Shari, you're allowed to continue cooking it. So we have a brisa that concurs with Rabbi Yochanan. In other words, we have the opinion of Hananya, lahachazir nami, and this that you're allowed to do hachazara, you're allowed to return the pot onto the flame. Nami tanina, we learned that too as well. Beis Hillel loimrim, af machzirin. Beis Hillel say in our Mishnah that you're even allowed to put the food back. And as we explained in our Mishnah, the end of the Mishnah is coming to tell us that that you're according to Beis Hillel, you're allowed to even put the foods back onto the stove if the heat source is covered. Like a shara Beis Hillel, and our Mishnah is talking about if it's where Beis Hillel say you're allowed to put it back if the heat source has either been raked out or covered. But if it's not gerufa ketuma, you're not allowed to put the food back on. So you practically you have soup on the stove. It's cooking. It's not fully done. You're allowed to keep it on from before Shabbos on the stove as long as it's partially cooked. You're allowed to keep it on. However, and it doesn't have to be that you have a blech. You don't have to cover the heat source. However, if you want to be able to put the soup back on because you want to be able to get soup later on, it's a winter, Shabbos comes in at 4, you're going to have some soup at 6, but at 8 o'clock, you're going to want to have another bowl of soup before you retire. Go ahead. So you can put it back on if you have the heat source covered. You have a blech. You take out cholent at night and you want to have a scoop. Go ahead. You can put it back as long as the heat source is covered.
So
Practically in halacha, there's a machlokas of whether the heat source for us means the stove or the knobs, because after all, we don't fan the flames of our oven, so the heat source itself doesn't need to be covered. The knobs need to be covered because that's where you're going to fan the flames. Or do we say no? Practically speaking, it diminishes the heat, or it acts as a reminder, and therefore what you need to do is cover the flames. The old blechs that they used to make had a backsplash, as it were, to cover the knobs. But most of our ovens, the knobs are not covered in that manner. The way they sit in a way that wouldn't work anyhow. So as you probably know, most people just cover the heat source and not the knobs themselves.
when you said partially cooked, is it understood that the shear is machal dursai, or is it a different shear?
No, it's machal ben dursai, right? Like Hanania said, and we saw yesterday, and we saw it in last parak. Hanania said, as long as it's cooked machal ben dursai, you're allowed to keep it on the fire for Shabbos. How long is machal ben dursai? How much is machal ben dursai? We said is either a third or a half, according to Rashi or Rambam. And indeed, Rav Sheshes, Rava says we have two brises that say this. Rav Sheshes indeed is only trying to say that we can deduce from our Mishnah in Beis Hillel that if it's covered, you're allowed to keep it on, and you're allowed to. If it's covered, you're even allowed to put it back. Lahachzir, you're allowed to put it back and continue having it on the stove. You use the proper heat source, wood or sediment. Rabbi Yochanan would say, that you're allowed to keep food on the stove from before Shabbos to continue cooking into Shabbos, even though it's not, even though that it's good for the food to continue cooking. However, it has to be fully cooked. That's the way he says it. As long as it's good for the food to continue cooking, you're allowed to keep it on. Meaning, even though that it's good for the food to continue cooking, you're allowed to keep it on the stove. However, it has to be the mitztamik that it's already fully cooked, as opposed to what we saw before, that even if it's not fully cooked. But it's very nice you said that in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. However, Rav and Shmuel, they're of the opinion that you're not allowed to do it, keep it on, even if it's fully cooked, unless it's no longer good for it to remain on. But mitztamik v'yafala, if it's beneficial for the food to continue cooking, even though it's fully cooked, that you're not allowed to keep on. Think I don't know that Rav Yosef said that in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, in the name of Shmuel, that if it's mitztamik v'yafala, if it's fully cooked but it's still beneficial to continue cooking, that it's that he's not allowed to keep it on. I'm telling you the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, who disagrees. Rabbi Yochanan was the head of the academy in Eretz Yisrael, and Rav and Shmuel were the heads of the academy in Bavel. Amalei Rav Ukva Mimeshan Ravashi. So Rav Ukva of Meshan said to Ravashi, Atun the Makravisu Rav Shmuel Avidik Rav Shmuel. You that you're close to Rav and Shmuel, so you have to follow the opinion of Rav Shmuel. And none Avid Rabbi Yochanan. Well, we can follow the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. Amalei Abai Rav Yosef Mahu Lishas. Abaye asked Rabbi Yosef, are you allowed to keep the food on the stove that is uncovered? Of course, if it's covered, then you're allowed to keep the food on from before Shabbos. But can you keep it on if it's not covered? And whether or not the food is fully cooked or partially cooked is not explicit here in Rashi. And Tues says that it has to be that his question was about if it's not fully cooked. But in Rashi doesn't say that. So his question was, am I allowed to keep it on if it continues to cook into Shabbos and the heat source is not covered? Amalei, Rabbi Yehuda Mashi Leva Achel. Rabbi Yehuda did. Yeah, we saw Rabbi Yehuda, who, by the way, before quoted Shmuel that you're not allowed to. Yeah, he did so. Amalei Barmini de Rabbi Yehuda. Of course, Rabbi Yehuda, who was in danger, so he was allowed to cook. Let it continue cooking on Shabbos because he needed hot food. Rashi explains that he had some sort of bulmus. He had episodes of passing out, and for him, he needed to eat sweet foods. He needed food ready, and so it would seem some sort of diabetes or something that he needed sweet food, and that he would get weak from low sugar. So he needed sweet foods and needed to be cooked. He needed food ready for it. So therefore, he's allowed to keep it on the stove. But what about me and you? Amalei besura mashu. In surah, they would keep the food on and allow it to continue cooking at the Shabbos. The Harav Nachman bar Yitzchak Mari the Uvda because of Nachman bar Yitzchak, we could trust him because he was very diligent. Anything he did, he made sure that it was properly done and done according to halacha. And he would keep it on the stove and continue letting it cook. V'achal and eat on Shabbos. Amar Ravashi said, we were in front of Rav Huna. In other words, we were at his place. So we were at Rav Huna's place, and they left this kisa de harsana, which was a fish in an einbrenn, a fish in a sauce made with flour and water, or flour and oil, and they kept it on the stove on Shabbos. But I don't know. Is it because he holds that you're allowed to keep it as long as it's fully cooked, and if it was small fish, it was easily cooked. So therefore, it was already cooked completely prior to Shabbos, and therefore you're allowed to keep it on. And even though it's beneficial, but nevertheless it's fully cooked, so you're allowed to keep it on. And that would be like the one opinion in Rabbi Yochanan. Or was the reason that really he holds like Rav and Shmuel that you're not allowed to keep it on if it's beneficial to the food, because maybe you're going to stoke the flames and continue cooking it. However, in the case of the kisa de harsana, since there's flour in the mixture, the gravy has flour in it. It is considered not beneficial for it to continue cooking because it'll dry out or harden, and therefore he was allowed to keep it on. But indeed, if it was mitztamik v'yafalo, if it was continued to be good for the food to keep it on, you would not be allowed to keep it on. Amar Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman said, mitztamik v'yafalo aser, mitztamik v'rale muter. Rav Nachman says, indeed, the halacha is that if it's bad for it, you're allowed to keep it on. If it's beneficial for the food to keep it to stay on the flame, you may end up stoking it, and therefore you're not allowed to keep it on. Kollel de milsa, as a rule, call the isbe mecha mitztamik v'rale, a bar mitavshel de lifta. Anything that has flour in it, it's not good for it, and you're allowed to keep it on. However, unless it's lefes, it's a turnip that's cooking. The afagav is that even though it has flour, it's beneficial for it to continue cooking. But that's only if this turnip stew that you have has meat in it as well. Have a less bisra. But if this turnip stew doesn't have meat in it, so then mitzdamek viralo, then even for turnip, it's going to be bad for it to continue cooking, and therefore you're allowed to keep it on the stove. And even if it has meat, you're not allowed to. And we say that it's beneficial for the turnip and meat and with flour or gravy to continue cooking, and therefore you're not allowed to keep it on. That's only if you don't have guests. But if you have guests, even though that it tastes better if it continues cooking, but it diminishes in size if it continues cooking, and you need a lot of this stew. So it's also you're allowed to keep it on because we're not concerned that you're going to you're going to stoke the flames because you're not going to fan the flames because you need more of the food, and it's bad in this. So it's subjective to the very scenarios that you have. Also, and since you need it for guests, it's bad for it. Lift the daisa v'tamri, some food that's made out of figs, porridge, or date food. Mitzdamek v'rale. Those foods are bad if they continue cooking, and therefore you're allowed to keep it on the flame. So a little bit before we go on about the halacha, because it's so relevant. Usually we don't go into halacha, but we have over here Rashi says, and this is uncommon for Rashi in Shabbos, but he does say to some degree, to some length, to say that really the halacha is like Hanania, that you're allowed to keep foods on from before Shabbos, even if you don't cover your heat source. However, if we look at the end of the Gemara doesn't seem to go with the with that, because we have Rav Nachman and Rav Huna who seem to say that as long as it's still beneficial for the food, you're not allowed to keep it on. So Rashi says, yeah, but since the other opinions of Rabbi Yochanan brought it that even though it's still beneficial for the food, you're allowed to keep it on. That's the halacha. In the Shulchan Aruch seems to bring both opinions. Doesn't seem to go one way. However, the Ramah is lenient. Says lechatchila, and this is what we do. Lechatchila, keep the food on only on a covered source. So we always lechatchila. The optimum way to do it is to cover your heat source, and that's why we have a blech or something to cover the heat source, and that's the way you allow something to continue cooking into Shabbos. However, if you did not do so, which is going to be the next question in the Gemara, that question is not la halacha. That if you didn't do so, by mistake you left the food on the stove, you can continue cooking it, no problem. You let it continue cooking as long as it's been cooked enough that it's edible, and you left it on the stove to continue cooking. It's going to be permissible to keep it on to eat it on Shabbos. However, you cannot put it back onto the stove if you took some off. You can't put it back on the stove unless you have the heat source completely covered, or it's mitzdamek varala. It's bad for it to continue cooking. You want to now ask a question, and we're going to go to Lamed Ches Amud Aleph.
Just one question.
Sure.
Just one question. I know the halacha is that you could put it back, but there are certain conditions how you have to do it, and
hopefully we'll get to that today. It's in the Gemara soon. Hopefully we get to that in a minute.
Okay.
So this is going in the opinion that you're not allowed to leave it on, and he forgot, and he left the food on in this manner that it was in the manner you're not allowed to because it's not fully cooked, as Tues says, or it's not cooked enough, like Ben Rusay, or according to the opinion of the Chachamim that you're not allowed to keep it on, and you did. You left. You were cooking something and you forgot to put on your blech, and you left it cooking directly on the heat source into Shabbos. Ubishla b'Shabbos, and it continued cooking into Shabbos. Mao, what's the halacha? Ishtik, so he didn't answer him. However, he didn't say anything. The next day, when he came to the academy, he came out and he said a drash about this. Darash lu hamavashal b'Shabbos b'shogeg yochel b'mezil yochel. As we'll see later, we have a brisa that says somebody cooked on Shabbos. So if he did so intentionally, you're not allowed to eat the food. If he did so unintentionally, he forgot it was Shabbos, or he forgot it was prohibited, or he didn't realize that this is going to cook it. So he did so in a manner that's that was not intended. Then he's allowed to eat the food. Veloshna, and it's not different. So what does it not different mean? Meaning this is different. So what he means is that this is different in the case where he left it. But what does he mean? It's stricter or more lenient. My Veloshna. So Rabbi Yosef that he was being more lenient. He said even though that if you cook it unintentionally, you're allowed to eat the food. If you cooked it intentionally, you're not allowed to eat the food. In regards to having left it on shehiyah by mistake, that's going to be permissible to eat. And not only that, even if you did so intentionally, which you shouldn't have, but nevertheless you're allowed to eat it. There, if he cooked it, he did the action on Shabbos, and he did so intentionally, so you can't eat that food. But over here, where he didn't do any action, he just was passive. He allowed it to continue cooking from before Shabbos into Shabbos. So even if you did so intentionally, you're allowed to eat the food on Shabbos. You shouldn't have done this, but nevertheless, you're allowed to eat it. No, it's stricter than having cooked on Shabbos. So therefore, where you cook on Shabbos, where you assume that someone's not going to play a trick and cook on Shabbos and say, oh, I did so unintentionally. Cooking on Shabbos is a d'oraisa prohibition. It's a Torah prohibition. So that's a proper action on Shabbos. Nobody's going to play a trick. So when he says that he says he did so unintentionally, he probably really did so unintentionally, and therefore he's allowed to eat it. However, cooking before Shabbos and leaving it on the stove on a fully uncovered, fully stocked oven, somebody could play a game and say, "Oh, I did so unintentionally," but really he did so intentionally, and he doesn't feel like he's breaking Shabbos because he did so. He put the food on before Shabbos. He didn't do anything on Shabbos. It's just continuing to cook. And what? You're concerned that maybe I'm going to fan the flames? Don't worry about me. And so he plays this game and says that it was unintentional, or really it was intentional, and we're afraid that he's going to do that. So we say, even unintentionally, you're not allowed to keep it. You're not allowed to eat it.
I heard. I don't know. Maybe this is completely wrong. So tell me, because I don't do this, but I've heard that as long as like your children's on the fire before Ben Hashmashos, that you could leave, even if it's not my shir machal dursai, that as long as it's on and it's cooking, that it's not a problem, so to speak.
So there is a concept we'll see later about kidra.
But I was thinking, according to this, if you do that every single week, then maybe.
No, it's not because you do it every week. That's not the basis here. We will see a concept of kidra chaysa. If you put you put a raw piece of meat in right before Shabbos. So at this point, you've indicated, I'm not eating this tonight. I'm only going to eat it tomorrow anyhow because it's not going to be ready for tonight. So therefore, it doesn't have to be a covered flame. It doesn't have. You're allowed to. Everybody agrees you're allowed to leave it on in that case, because you've clearly said to yourself and the world, I'm not eating this tonight, because you put something raw in right before Shabbos. There's no way it's going to be ready for tonight. So you masalik das, you megala das that you're not going to eat. It's not on account that you do it every week, but rather because this is not. There's no way it's going to be ready even if you fan the flames. Meisaveh. So Gemara asks a question. Shachach kedera gabi kiro bishla b'Shabbos. If he forgot the pot on the stove, and it was supposed to have been covered, either according to the opinion that it has to be covered, or it's the type of food that needs to be covered. It's not even macham in the soy. Ubishla b'Shabbos, and it cooked on Shabbos. If he did so intentionally, he's not allowed to eat it. Unintentionally, he's allowed to eat it. Now, before we go on to the caveats, this is going to contradict both of the opinions we saw before, because both the opinions said, Rabbi Yosef said he was being lenient and said, regardless of whether you did so intentionally or unintentionally, you were allowed to eat the food because you didn't do any action on Shabbos. And Nachman Yitzchak said that that he was being strict and said even unintentionally you're not allowed to eat it on account of that maybe you're going to asila arumi, maybe you're going to play this game and say that you did so unintentionally, but it was really intentional. So this is a contradiction to both. That's what the Gemara is going to challenge. However, the Gemara continues with the Brisa, which puts on some caveats into when this is that you're not allowed to eat it. But that's in hot water or hot food that was not fully cooked. However, if they would fully cook before Shabbos, so then regardless if you did so intentionally or unintentionally, you're allowed to eat it. Rabbi Meir. That's Rabbi Meir's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, it has to be only hot water that's fully cooked. At that point, if it's fully cooked, it's mitztamik varala. It's diminishing and it's bad for it. There's no benefit of it to continue cooking. However, but food, even if it's fully cooked, it's going to be prohibited because it's still a benefit for it to continue cooking. And foods that are beneficial for it to continue cooking, such as kruv, which we always translate as Brussels sprouts, and pulin, beans, and basar toruf, and ground meat, which Rashi says the fats come out, and it's good, it becomes a fattier food. Usr. So then it's prohibited to continue cooking it. However, if it was bad for it, it's no longer beneficial for it to continue cooking, mutter, then if you left it on, you're allowed to eat it because it was bad. It was fully cooked and bad for it to continue cooking before Shabbos. So there was no concern of stoking the flames, of fanning the flames. It says that any food that's not fully cooked, in both opinions, you're not allowed to eat it if you left it on before Shabbos intentionally. So Bishlam or Rav Nachman Yitzchak. So according to Rav Nachman Yitzchak, we can say that he's being lenient before the gezerah, where people were fooling themselves and saying that they did it unintentionally, but it was really intentional. Therefore, it says that unintentionally you're allowed to eat it. But later, when it became a problem, they said even if you did so unintentionally, you're not allowed to eat it because they were lying. Ella Rabbi Rav Yosef but Rabbi Rav Yosef, they both said that he was being lenient, and not only unintentionally, but even intentionally allowed to keep it on the flames because it was mitztamik. Because he didn't do any action on Shabbos. It was just left on from before Shabbos. If it's before the enactment, so why intentionally are you allowed to keep it on? The Brisa says that only unintentionally is allowed to eat it. And and after the gzera, then even unintentionally was prohibited. And they're saying it's lenient to both ways. So nami kasha. Kasha nami shogeg. So kasha, indeed, it's a good question. Now, my gezerto, what is this enactment that they're talking about? Amar Rav Yehuda bar Shmuel, Amar Rav Abba, Amar Rav Kahana, Amar Rav in the name of Rav. At first, they would say somebody cooked on Shabbos unintentionally, you're allowed to eat it. Intentionally, you're not allowed to eat it. And also, if you left it on the flames by mistake, because Rav is of the opinion you're not allowed to leave it on the flames, and by mistake you left it on the flame before Shabbos and you forgot to cover it, you forgot to put your blech on. So unintentionally allowed to eat it. However, people started leaving it on intentionally with the uncovered heat source. And they said that we forgot about it. So then they said, you know what? Regardless of whether you say you did it intentionally or unintentionally, you're not allowed to eat it if you didn't cover your heat source. Now the Gemara says, okay, so that explains this discussion. If you did so unintentionally, what the halach is. And again, for us that we mainly follow the opinion of Hananiah, this is not going to be an issue. The Gemara, however, says that we have a problem. In this brisa, Rabbi Meir was lenient, and Rabbi Yehuda was strict. We saw yesterday that Rabbi Meir was strict and said that you're not allowed, that anything that was left on the flame, that Bishamai says you're not allowed to leave foods on at all, only water is allowed to be left on. And Rabbi Yehuda was the lenient one, that you're allowed to leave things on as long as they're fully cooked. So what's going on? So we have a contradiction. Kasha to Rabbi Meir, Kasha to Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara says, true that it's a contradiction for both of them, but there's an explanation. The Rabbi Meir, the Rabbi Meir like Kasha. There's no contradiction to Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says lechatchila. That means if you're planning this, you're not allowed to leave the food on. It has to be a covered heat source. You're not allowed to leave it on. However, Hadiyevet, if you did so, then he's lenient that says you're allowed to eat the food if you did so unintentionally. The Rabbi Yehuda, Nami Lekasha. And Rabbi Yehuda says also, and Rabbi Meir says you can't leave food regardless, only hot water. But if you left it on, he's lenient to the degree that even food you're allowed to eat if you did so unintentionally. And Rabbi Yehuda, Nami Lekasha, Rabbi Yehuda is also not a question. Kam begrufa ptuma, kam b'sheina grufa ptuma. He says if it's a heat source that's covered, you're allowed to leave it on. However, an uncovered heat source, there he says, even if you left it on unintentionally, you're not allowed to eat it. Ibailu, avar v'sham, mikatsu rabbanan. If you, according to Rabbi Yehuda, says you're not allowed to leave it on, or according to our mayor that says you're not allowed to leave it on, what happens if you left it on and you transgressed? Did the Chacham say you're not allowed to eat it or not? Tashamad, Amar Shmuel, Rav Nosson, Rav Chanina, Kashalach Rabbi Yossi l'Tzipori. Rabbi Yossi went to Tzipori. Matzah chamesh shenishtohu al gabi kira. He found hot water that was left directly on a heat source on the stove. And he didn't say it's prohibited. Beitzim matzumakas, and also they would take eggs and they would let it boil away, and would shrivel up, and they liked that it was considered good food. So these shriveled eggs, shenishto agabikiru, also left on the stove. But asalem, and that he said is prohibited. My lav lo is a Shabbos. Wouldn't he say that for that Shabbos he said it was prohibited? And we see that he didn't allow them to eat it. The hot water, he said, if you left it on, it's prohibited, and the reason would be because it's permitted. The reason would be because it's mitztamik varala, hot water. Once it's hot, it's fully hot. There's no benefit to it to continue cooking. So the only is so that it's mitztamik varala. It's just diminishing at that point, and therefore he allowed them to eat it. Whereas the eggs, which they wanted to shrivel, and for them that's considered a good food, so it's mitztamik v'yafala. Its continued cooking on into Shabbos is actually beneficial, and therefore he didn't allow them to eat it that Shabbos. The Gemara says, no, that's not actually what happened. L'Shabbos haba. What he said to them was, next Shabbos, don't do this. This Shabbos, you can eat it. You did it already. You left it on, my mistake. But for next Shabbos, don't do that. You have to cover the heat source. And so we see that these shriveled eggs, the more it cooks, the better. Indeed, I and Rebbe once went to a certain place. It was so shriveled, it was like uzradin, that it was completely shriveled down. And we loved it. We ate many of them. So we see that it's a beneficial food. So what we have is, according to Hanania, you're allowed to keep food on as long as it's cooked to some degree, allowed to keep it on this flame to continue cooking into Shabbos, even though it's uncovered. According to the Chachamim, the heat source has to be covered in order to be allowed to lishos, to keep it on the flame. And it only has to be covered in order to return the food once you've taken it off. Tomorrow we'll see the halachas of that Michael mentioned about this idea of when you're allowed to put it back. There are conditions of how your intent to return it is still there. In any case, if you, according to the opinion of the Chachamim, if you left it on, this is the question we have: do you transgress and therefore you're punished, and said you can't eat the food on Shabbos or not? We have this machlokas in the Gemara here, and in the end, we have this halacha that said that no, he allowed them to continue eating it for this Shabbos, and only for next Shabbos he said don't do this.